The year was 1330 from the birth of Christ. In the damp, pervasive fog that clung to the ancient walls of Derbent, only faint silhouettes of towers and fortifications could be discerned through the murk. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, or perhaps a sense of imminent catastrophe, as if the very air whispered that something momentous was about to unfold. No one was aware at that moment that, on this day, the strands of destiny would intertwine to form a knot that would alter the course of history in Eastern Europe forever. From the south, beyond the vast expanse of the Arab Caliphate, a relentless army advanced, led by one of the most renowned military commanders of his era, Jari ibn Abdullah al-Hakami. His troops, intoxicated by generations of victories, bore banners adorned with crescents and inscribed with unwavering faith in the divine mission to bring the entire world under the sway of their caliph. Having already subdued Persia, the Levant, North Africa, and even Spain, their ambitions now reached northward, beyond the formidable Caucasus Mountains. Yet, in that region's steppes, they faced an adversary unlike any they had encountered before. This formidable foe was the Khazars, a nomadic people of Turkic origin, who had forged an empire at the crossroads of diverse worlds. Their horsemen resonated with the spirit of the endless steppes, swift, elusive, and deadly. The Khazar Khagan, the supreme ruler considered sacred by his people, commanded a fiercely brave military that faced no fear. For nearly a century, the Khazar Khaganate stood as an impregnable bastion, a resilient fortress upon which waves of Arab invasions repeatedly broke. It became a mighty shield that shielded Eastern Europe from the relentless expansion of the Caliphate. In this quiet defense, under the protection of Khazar blades, the early formation of Slavic tribal alliances was beginning. These tribes, destined in the future to become the foundation of Russia, had yet to fully shape their destiny. Amidst the calm, only whispers of life and tombs of history, the Khazar state defended its borders with unwavering resolve, creating a barrier behind which these nascent Slavic communities could slowly develop their identity. On that fateful day, at the walls of Sedar Artabel, two mighty forces were destined to clash in a decisive confrontation. The Arab commander, Jari, was confident of victory, trusting in the strength of his well-disciplined army and divine favor. He believed that Allah's will was with him and that the conquest was inevitable. Yet, he was unaware that the Khazar army was being led into battle by not merely a general, but by a prince of noble blood named Borjil, a man hungry for glory and determined to defend his land at any cost. Jari could not foresee that the furious resistance of the steppe warriors, fighting fiercely to defend their homes and their way of life, would prove to be more formidable than fanaticism alone. Neither could he imagine that the echoes of this clash of civilizations, would, decades later, push the rulers of Khazaria towards one of the most extraordinary and mysterious decisions of medieval history, embracing the religion of a people who had no kingdom of their own, nor a standing army to speak of. They would adopt Judaism. This is a tale about the Khazar Khaganate, an ephemeral kingdom that, like a brilliant flash in the Eurasian map, shaped the destinies of dozens of peoples throughout a century, only to vanish almost without a trace. It left behind more questions than answers, igniting debates that continue to this day. The story narrates how wild nomads built a thriving commercial empire, how their elite made an unthinkable religious choice, and how what seemed to be an invincible state disintegrated into dust under the onslaught of a youthful, fierce enemy from the north. All that remained were legends and the restless discussions of historians, still alive at present. Before the emergence of Khazaria itself on the historical stage, it is essential to delve into the tumultuous whirlpool of the people's ancestors, rooted in the vast, bubbling steppeland of the early first millennium. Imagine an endless ocean of grasses stretching from the Altai Mountains all the way to the Carpathians. This world knew no clear boundaries, no lines drawn boldly on maps, only endless expanses where the horizon dissolved into the horizon itself, a boundless domain of nomadic life and eternal horizon. Their boundaries stretched along the limits of pasture lands, while the routes of their migrations charted invisible lines marking the shifting domains of tribal alliances. Life in this region was governed by a harsh, straightforward rhythm marked by the changing seasons, the movements of nomadic groups, and the ceaseless tides of warfare. It was an environment where dozens of empires had risen and fallen over the centuries, with the Khazar Khaganate standing out as one of the most vibrant and influential, yet far from the first, to emerge from these unforgiving lands. In the 6th century of our era, the vast territory was dominated by the Turks, not just as a linguistic or ethnic group, but as the creators of a colossal nomadic empire, the Turkic Khaganate, whose expansive reach extended from the heart of China all the way to the shores of the Black Sea. The rise of the Khazars must be understood as part of this larger historical tapestry, a powerful state that emerged amidst the remnants and echoes of this immense political formation. The rulers of Khazaria were likely kin to the rulers of the Turkic Khanate, belonging to the illustrious Ashina clan, which was revered as divine in the tradition of nomadic tribes, holding the sacred right to govern the steppes and their peoples. At that time, the Khazars were merely one among many wandering tribes, shifting from Asia during a period of great migrations, what historians call the Migration Period or the Great Movement of Peoples. They were part of a larger confederation known as the Sarmatians, who, along with the Khazars and other nomadic groups, conducted daring raids into the Caucasus region. These incursions threatened the borders of the powerful Sassanid Empire in Persia and the Byzantine Empire to the west, signaling their importance on the geopolitical stage. Yet, regardless of their seemingly boundless strength, even mighty empires carry the seeds of their own disintegration. By the early 6th century, the vast Turkic Khaganate, itself riddled with internal strife, succession disputes, and rivalry among rival clans, fractured into two main branches, Eastern and Western. It was on the ruins of the western part that the future state of Khazaria would be born, after a long, bloody process of decline and division. The weakening of the central authority of the Khagan allowed numerous tribes, once held tightly under the iron grip of their overlords, to begin vying fiercely for independence and dominance over their neighbors. During these turbulent times, a new significant player emerged on the geopolitical landscape, the Bulgars. In the year 1332, their charismatic leader, Khan Kubrat, succeeded in uniting disparate Bulgar tribes under a single banner and establishing a formidable state in the Pontic-Caspian steppe, a polity that Western chroniclers called Great Bulgaria. For a time, it seemed as though the Bulgars might inherit the legacy of Turkic power in Eastern Europe, with hopes pinning on their potential to become a successor civilization. However, this hegemony was short-lived. Following the death of Khan Kubrat, his sons failed to maintain the unity of the nascent state, and the internal discord soon opened the door for outside forces to seize the opportunity. The rising power of the Khazars, whose influence was growing steadily, quickly countered Bulgar ambitions. In a series of intense and brutal conflicts around the 66th year, the Khazars, possibly in alliance with the Alans, dealt a crushing defeat to the Great Bulgarians. This decisive blow marked a turning point in regional history, a point of no return. As a result of this defeat, the Bulgar nation fragmented into different factions. One part, led by Khan Asparukh, migrated westward past the Danube, where the blending of Bulgar tribes with local Slavic populations laid the foundation for what would eventually become the modern Bulgarian state. Meanwhile, another faction, under Khan Kotrag, moved northward into the Middle Volga and Kama regions, where they established the prosperous state of Volga Bulgaria. The remnants remaining near the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, the Bulgar tribes that had not migrated, were absorbed into the expanding Khazar Empire, becoming integral parts of the Khazar territories and contributing to the growth of their powerful state. Thus, the history of this region is marked by a series of dramatic upheavals, migrations, and the rise and fall of great powers, each leaving its own lasting imprint on the complex mosaic of Eurasian history. By the mid-6th century, after eliminating one competitor and displacing another, Khazaria had risen to become the dominant power across the steppes stretching from the Volga River to the Dnieper. This marked the emergence of what could be called the early Khaganate, a nascent state that would soon shape the history of Eastern Europe and its borderlands. The roots of this burgeoning state lay in the Caspian Sea's northern steppe regions, specifically in the territory of present-day Dagestan, which served as the cradle of Khazar civilization. Initially, the Khazar state was a federation comprising a variety of tribes, unified under the authority of a ruling elite from the Khazar clan. At the very top of this hierarchy was the Khagan. This role was not merely political but carried profound sacred significance. The Khagan was regarded as the earthly representative of divine grace, known as the Kut, a sacred blessing believed to ensure the prosperity and well-being of the entire population. The true wielders of practical power, including military command and governance, were individuals holding a different title, the Bak. This dual authority system, where a spiritual figure coexisted with a pragmatic ruler, was unique in Khazar society and would eventually become a defining characteristic of their political structure. Although this system would be fully formed only later, its origins stretched back to the early Turkic period, when dual kingship and religious authority were often intertwined in nomadic and semi-nomadic societies. In those initial centuries, the Khazars practiced Tengrism, a form of ancient Turkic paganism that revered Tengri, the eternal blue sky god, who was regarded as the supreme deity overseeing war, kingship, and fate. Their religious pantheon was headed by Tengrahan, the god of the boundless heavens, believed to grant authority to rulers and protect warriors. They worshipped natural forces, fire, water, moon, and engaged in ritual sacrifices, believing that these offerings could invoke the favor of the spirits and maintain cosmic balance. Shamans played a vital role, serving as spiritual mediators who communicated with the invisible world to glean divine guidance. Their culture and way of life reflected that of typical nomadic tribes of the Eurasian steppe belt. The core of their economy was based on animal husbandry, breeding and moving livestock across vast steppes to access fresh pastures. Their dwellings were traditional yurts, portable tents that could be quickly assembled and dismantled during migrations. Social organization was primarily clan and kin-based, reinforcing a strong sense of kinship and mutual obligation among members. Warfare was inseparable from their existence, not only a means of defending their territory but also an essential source of wealth, prestige, and honor. However, their fierce militarism would soon face the severest trial. On the southern border of this emerging khaganate arose a new power, one that would carry with it a revolutionary faith and an utterly different worldview, the Arab Caliphate. Having established its dominance over the Arabian Peninsula and parts of North Africa, the rapidly expanding caliphate was an aggressive force, driven by a unifying religious zeal and imperial ambition. Soon after consolidating their rule in the Eastern European steppes, the newborn Khazar Khaganate encountered an existential threat from the south. During the middle of the 6th century, Arab armies, motivated by their religious ideals and relentless spirit of conquest, swept across the Near East like a blazing wave, reshaping the geopolitical landscape. The mighty Persian Empire, which had long been a dominant force in the region, lost its richest provinces to the Arabs, who then turned their gaze northward towards the Caucasus mountain range, a natural barrier separating the settled civilizations from the vast steppe. This formidable mountain chain historically marked the border between the world of sedentary society and the expansive steppe wilderness. It was here that the Arabs' seemingly unstoppable expansion met a fierce and seemingly insurmountable obstacle in the form of Khazar territory. From that moment, a series of protracted, grueling, and bloody wars ensued, conflicts that would last for more than a century and ultimately determine the fate not only of Khazaria but also influence the course of Eastern European history for centuries to come. The first major clash took place approximately in the year 652. In that engagement, the Arab military commander Abd al-Rahman ibn Rabi'a led a force through the Derbent Pass, a critical gateway into the Khazar lands, advancing deep into their territory and laying siege to the city of Belendigar, which is believed to have been the earliest known capital of the Khazar Khaganate. Arab chroniclers describe this battle as fiercely fought and bloody, a testament to the fierce defense mounted by the Khazars. The defenders fought with desperation, fighting tooth and nail to repel the invaders. In a decisive moment, they launched a swift and unexpected counterattack that swept away the Arab forces, halting their advance and temporarily disrupting their push deeper into Khazar lands. This confrontation marked only the beginning of a long and arduous struggle for control over these strategic frontier regions, a conflict that would shape the destiny of Khazaria and influence the broader geopolitical dynamics across Eurasia for many decades to come. Abd-ar-Rahman ibn Rabi'a fell in battle, and his army, having suffered a crushing defeat, was thrown into disarray and forced to retreat in chaos. This victory held immense psychological significance, as it demonstrated to the Arabs that they were not invincible and that their formidable foes could be overcome. For several decades, the Abbasid Caliphate, embroiled in internal turmoil and civil unrest, refrained from launching any further campaigns across the Caucasus, instead focusing on stabilizing its own internal affairs. However, by the beginning of the 7th century, under the renewed strength of the Umayyad dynasty, the Caliphate restored its power and resumed its ambitious expansionist policies. The Arab and Khazar warriors once again clashed with renewed vigor, resulting in a series of raids, sieges, and fierce battles that alternated between success and setback for each side. These military operations often proved unpredictable in outcome. Notable Arab commanders, such as the renowned Maslama ibn Abdul Malik and the ruthless Jarrah ibn Abdullah al-Hakami, repeatedly invaded Khazar territory, setting ablaze cities and villages, capturing thousands of prisoners, and spreading destruction in their wake. In response, the Khazar cavalry mounted retaliatory raids that were equally devastating, ravaging the regions of Transcaucasia, Armenia, and Caucasian Albania. Their forays extended deep into the borders of present-day Iran, demonstrating the intense and persistent nature of this conflict. The culmination of this century-long confrontation was the Second Arab-Khazar War, fought from the year 722 to 737. During this period, hostilities reached unprecedented levels of brutality and intensity. In the year 1020, the Khazar army, led by Prince Barchil, son of the Khagan, launched a massive invasion into Arab-controlled lands. Breaking through into the Iranian-Azerbaijan region, the Khazars engaged in a three-day battle at Ardabil, where they dealt a devastating defeat to an Arab force numbering 25,000 soldiers. The Arab commander, Jarrah, was killed in the battle, and nearly all his troops were annihilated. This victory opened the way for the Khazars to push further into the heartlands of the Caliphate. They razed and pillaged provincial towns and villages, venturing all the way to the outskirts of Mosul on the territory of modern Iraq. In the Caliphate's capital, Damascus, panic and chaos reigned, as it seemed that nothing could halt the advance of these northern invaders. The response from the Caliphate was swift and relentless. A new, vast army was assembled under the command of one of the Umayyad dynasty's most gifted generals, Marwan ibn Muhammad, who was destined to become caliph himself. In the year 737, Marwan launched a campaign that would prove to be a turning point for the Khazar resistance. He divided his 50,000-strong forces into two units. One, under his personal command, crossed the Darial Gorge, while the second, led by the governor of Derbent, moved along the Caspian coast. The two armies converged within Khazar territory and launched a fierce assault against the unsuspecting Khagan. The Khazar army was decisively defeated. The fortified city of Simandr was stormed, falling into Arab hands. Marwan pursued the retreating Khagan deep into his realm, heading toward the Volga River. Cornered at the edge of his land, with no strength left to resist, the Khagan was compelled to seek peace. As part of the surrender, he was forced to accept Islam openly under Marwan's terms. It appeared that the Khazar state was on the brink of collapse, poised to become another provincial outpost of the Caliphate. Yet, this seemingly decisive victory did not mark the end of Khazar independence. Soon after, internal conflicts broke out within the Caliphate itself, leading to the fall of the Umayyad dynasty and the rise of the Abbasids. Seizing this opportunity, the Khazars quickly regained their independence, repudiating the religion imposed upon them. Although sporadic clashes persisted until the end of the 6th century, the large-scale wars inevitably came to an end, and the Khazars re-established their sovereignty, holding firm against further Arab expansion. Both of the ancient empires, exhausted after centuries of relentless struggle, had effectively preserved their status quo, each maintaining its own distinctive domain and influence. Their borders finally stabilized along the rugged Caucasian mountain range, marking a clear division between their respective worlds. But what were the ultimate results of such a colossal confrontation that spanned generations? For the Caliphate, this conflict represented the first significant halt in its relentless expansion across new territories. Simultaneously, the Khazar Khaganate, alongside the Frankish kingdom to the west, which had previously halted the Arab armies in the Battle of Poitiers, and the Byzantine Empire to the south, emerged as the third formidable bastion where wave after wave of Islamic conquest was ultimately checked and broken. This war had profound ripple effects for the Khazar state. It compelled the elite ruling class to reconsider their geopolitical situation and strategic priorities. As the conflict raged, they found themselves forced to adapt to the shifting dynamics of power and influence, which ultimately led to a pivotal decision: relocating their capital from the Dagestani city of Simandr to a northern location along the Volga River, where they established the new city of Ityal. This move shifted the very heart of Khazar politics and power, bringing their seat of authority closer to vital trade routes that linked northern Europe with the east. More importantly, these military conflicts stirred deep introspection among the Khazar aristocracy and leadership. Surrounded by two great civilizations, the Christian Byzantine Empire to the west and the Muslim Caliphate to the south, the Khazars found themselves increasingly aware of the necessity to forge a distinct, independent ideological identity. Their arduous quest to define this identity did not come easily, but it ultimately led them to a decision that would seem, at first glance, quite unexpected in the course of their history. The war was not merely a test of their military resilience, it acted as a catalyst for profound internal change, prompting the Khazar ruling class to forge new cultural and political foundations amid turbulent times. While fierce battles were being waged on the southern borders against the armies of the Caliphate, within their expansive territories, a period of relative peace and prosperity unfolded, a golden era often referred to by historians as the Khazar world. Having successfully defended against the Arab threat and established firm borders along the Caucasus, Khazaria for nearly 2 centuries asserted itself as a dominant power in Eastern Europe. Its dominion stretched from the Ural Mountains in the east to the Dnieper River in the west, covering extensive territories from the northern forests down to Crimea and the Caucasus to the south. Under Khazar control and protection, numerous tribes and peoples found security and relative autonomy, including the Bulgars, Burtas, Alans, and early Hungarians before their westward migration. Of particular importance for our story are the extensive alliances with East Slavic tribes, such as the Polans, Severians, Votis, and Radomics. These tribes paid tribute, referred to in old chronicles as a pelt and a chaff from the smoke, indicating a modest, per-household tribute. This levying was not overly burdensome, rather, it was a form of payment for protection and stability. In return, Khazaria guaranteed its vassals safety from raids by other nomadic groups and the cessation of intertribal warfare. This mutual understanding fostered a sense of stability across their vast territories, which, in turn, led to a remarkable surge in international trade. Trade became the backbone of the Khazar economy, fueling its wealth and influence. The strategic geographic position of the Khazar Khaganate allowed it to control vital trade routes connecting east and west, north and south. Notably, through its territory flowed the northern branch of the famed Silk Road, which brought silk, spices, precious stones, and luxury goods from China and Central Asia directly into Europe and the Byzantine Empire. However, even more significant was the Great Volga route. Under full Khazar control, Arab merchants transported their goods northward along the Volga, establishing a vital artery for commerce and cultural exchange. This river route linked the lucrative markets of the east with the Western world, serving as a major conduit for trade and communication. In essence, the Khazar Khaganate's strategic positioning and active control over these vital routes turned it into a preeminent hub of commerce and diplomacy, shaping regional history in ways that would echo for generations to come. In the earliest stages of its development, the elegant silver dirhams emerged as the primary currency circulating within Eastern Europe. These coins served as the main medium of exchange, facilitating trade between the diverse peoples inhabiting the vast steppes and forests. As the scouts and traders from Slavic and Finno-Ugric lands journeyed through lush woodlands and fertile plains, they exchanged these silver pieces for highly prized commodities of their time. Among the most valuable goods acquired through such transactions were rare and luxurious animal pelts such as sable, marten, and the black fur of foxes, along with honey, beeswax, and, sadly, captives, people who were often traded as slaves. This bustling trade was centralized in the new capital of the Khaganate Itil, a city that became the very heart of commercial activity in the early medieval world. Located at the mouth of the Great Volga River, Itil blossomed into a thriving metropolis that drew the attention of chronicles and geographers alike. Notable Arab scholars like Ibn Haqil and al-Masudi provided detailed accounts of this bustling city, describing its complex and vibrant layout. Itil was organized into 3 interconnected parts spread across both banks of the river and upon an island territory. On the island stood the majestic palace of the Khagan and the Bey, constructed from baked bricks, an extraordinary luxury in the steppe's rugged environment, signifying the city's prosperity and cultural sophistication. To the west, the aristocratic courts, military garrisons, and the majority of the pure Khazar population resided. Meanwhile, the eastern sector pulsated with commerce, markets teeming with activity, storage facilities, craft workshops, and neighborhoods inhabited by traders and artisans from various ethnic backgrounds and religious beliefs. In this diverse environment, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans coexisted, each community maintaining their own places of worship, be it mosques, churches, synagogues, or courts of law, where cases were judged according to their respective religious laws. This remarkable religious tolerance was not driven by humanitarian ideals but was a pragmatic political strategy aimed at fostering trade relations. The Khazar government understood well that attracting merchants from all over the world would bring considerable wealth to the state coffers. And so it was, the transcontinental commerce brought in enormous revenues, with a 10% tax levied on every caravan and ship passing through the borders of the Khaganate. This steady influx of silver enhanced the treasury's strength, enabling it to sustain a formidable army of mercenaries, construct strategic fortresses, and conduct an independent foreign policy. Among these fortifications was the Sarkol fortress, built in the 900s, with the assistance of Byzantine engineers. Situated along the Don River, it controlled the vital waterway connecting the Don and the Volga and served as an essential outpost protecting the northwestern borders of the empire. But who were the key agents in this extensive web of international commerce? Arab sources often mention enigmatic traders known as Rakhdanians or Radanites, Jewish merchants whose trading networks spanned from France and Western Europe all the way to China. Their routes traversed the Khazar territory, connecting the steppe empire with distant markets and civilizations. These merchants are believed to have been among the first to introduce not only luxury goods into the Khazar realm but also new ideas, particularly monotheistic religious beliefs, broadening the cultural horizon of the Khazar elite. Their wealth, influence, and presence undoubtedly left a profound impression on the Khazar aristocracy and ruling class. As a result, by the onset of the 9th century, the Khazar Khaganate had evolved from a wild, nomadic confederation into a complex, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious state, one that thrived on controlling and benefiting from transcontinental trade routes. Yet, this prosperity was not without its dark side. Over time, the military power of the Khaganate increasingly relied not on the traditional tribal militias but on hired soldiers, mercenaries, whose loyalty could be bought but also made the state vulnerable. Economically, the empire became fragile, susceptible to fluctuations in global trade and market conditions. Furthermore, the ruling elite, having grown distant from their nomadic roots, faced a profound ideological vacuum, grappling with a sense of identity loss amid rapid social and economic change. The ancient pagan faith of the ancestors had long ceased to provide a satisfactory explanation for the complexity of the emerging world and no longer served as a reliable foundation for authority. As the Khaganate approached a period of profound transformation, it was clear that its traditional beliefs could no longer sustain the evolving social and political realities. By the end of the centuries, the Khazar Khaganate had reached the zenith of its power and influence. It stood as an undisputed arbiter in the affairs of Eastern Europe, with its treasury overflowing from lucrative trade tariffs and its armies striking fear into neighboring states. Yet, behind this outward display of prosperity and military might, there lurked a deep-rooted ideological crisis that threatened the very fabric of its identity. In a world dominated by the expansive doctrines of monotheistic religions, the old Turkic paganism, Tengriism, appeared increasingly archaic and out of place. Once suitable for a confederation of nomadic warrior tribes, this ancient belief system had difficulty adapting to the demands of a complex, multinational empire that thrived on commerce and diplomacy. The Khazar realm found itself at a pivotal spiritual crossroads. On one side loomed Islam from the south, spreading from the Arab Caliphate. This new faith represented not only a religion of former enemies but also a faith embraced by many traders operating along the Volga River and in Itil, the bustling commercial hub. Converting to Islam offered the promise of improved relations with the powerful southern neighbor and integration into the vast Islamic civilization, which was then expanding rapidly. On the other side, from the west and southwest, Christianity made inroads through the Byzantine Empire and the Khazar-controlled Crimean cities. Byzantium had long been a traditional, if sometimes unreliable, ally in the ongoing struggle against the Arab forces. Over the centuries, Byzantine emperors repeatedly sought to convert the Khazar rulers, dispatching missionaries to persuade them to adopt Christianity. One of the most notable efforts included the outreach of the renowned philosopher and missionary, Saint Cyril, who in the 9th century journeyed to Khazaria with the aim of spreading Christianity. Opting for Christianity would have aligned the Khazar Khaganate more closely with the European nations, strengthening its bonds with the continent's most potent Christian power. Each of these options offered clear political advantages. Aligning with the Islamic world or with Byzantine Christianity could bring economic, military, and diplomatic benefits. However, both paths also carried hidden dangers. Converting to Islam risked turning the Khazars into vassals of the Baghdad Caliphate, potentially eroding their independence. Choosing Christianity could have subjected them to political dependence on the Byzantine Empire's emperor, limiting their sovereignty. For centuries, the Khazar elite fought to preserve their independence, seeking a third way, a path that would allow them to modernize and embrace a universal monotheistic religion while maintaining their sovereignty, cultural distinctiveness, and political autonomy. This alternative was found in a most intriguing form. In the territory of the Khazar Khaganate, especially within the coastal cities of Dagestan and Crimea, Jewish communities had been established for many centuries. Moreover, the routes of Jewish traders, known as Radhanites, passed through Khazar lands, facilitating extensive contact and exchanges. As a result, the Khazar aristocracy became familiar with Judaism, which possessed unique characteristics that could appeal to their rulers. Firstly, Judaism represented the most ancient and unambiguous monotheistic faith, standing alongside Christianity and Islam as one of the earliest traditions worshipping one supreme deity. Secondly, and crucially for the Khazars, at that time, Judaism was not tied to any specific empire or ruling dynasty. Unlike Christianity and Islam, which were closely associated with particular political entities, the Jewish people had long been a people of the book rather than a nation bound by imperial allegiance. By adopting Judaism, the Khazar Khagan could declare their full ideological independence, asserting their sovereignty on a religious level without becoming vassals of any foreign power. The process of conversion appears to have been gradual, carefully orchestrated over time, allowing the Khazar rulers to assess and adopt the faith that best suited their strategic and spiritual needs. This unique choice of faith provided them with a way to modernize their state while maintaining full control over their political and cultural destiny. It was a path that allowed the Khazar elite to align with a monotheistic tradition that was both ancient and politically neutral, yet capable of uniting a diverse, multi-ethnic empire under a common spiritual banner. Therefore, in the face of monumental religious and political pressures, the Khazar ruling class sought a solution that would secure their independence, bolster their national identity, and enable them to navigate the turbulent currents of their era's ideological upheavals. According to the traditions recorded by the Khazar scribes, there exists a historical account that shed light on the earliest known conversion to Judaism among the Khazar ruling class. This account, preserved in a letter attributed to King Joseph, describes how a military leader named Bulan was the first to embrace the Jewish faith and officially become a follower of Judaism. This pivotal event likely took place around the year 740 of the Common Era. It is believed that Bulan's decision was influenced by the aftermath of the devastating defeat inflicted upon the Khazars by Arab forces in the year 737, which possibly prompted a spiritual search for a more powerful and unifying religious foundation. Initially, Bulan and those close to him are thought to have adopted a non-rabbinic form of Judaism, or perhaps a variant similar to what later might be called Karaite Judaism, an approach that recognized only the written Torah, devoid of the authority of the Talmud or rabbinic tradition. However, these early phases of religious transformation were only the beginning of a much more profound and far-reaching shift. At the turn of the 6th and 7th centuries, during the reign of Bulan's descendant, the Khazar Khagan Abadaya, the situation underwent a dramatic change. It was during Abadaya's rule that a comprehensive religious reform was implemented, an effort that would forever alter the spiritual and political landscape of the Khazar state. According to historical sources, Abadaya declared Judaism as the state religion in its rabbinic form, officially adopting the law of the Talmud, and began actively constructing synagogues throughout the territory. He also invited prominent Jewish scholars and teachers from various lands to educate the Khazar populace in the deeper doctrines of the Torah and the Talmud, elevating Judaism from a mere personal faith to a state-sponsored religious identity. This bold move, however, did not go unopposed. It provoked fierce resistance from a segment of the Khazar aristocracy, nobles and officials who still adhered strongly to their old pagan beliefs and traditions. As a result, the empire was embroiled in a protracted and intense civil conflict, marked by ideological clashes and political struggles. Despite the hardships and internal strife, Abadaya and his supporters emerged victorious. Their triumph, however, came at the cost of significant weakening of the Khazar state's stability and unity. These tumultuous events led to the establishment of a distinctive dual system of authority within the Khaganate. On one hand was the sacred, traditional figure of the Khagan, rooted in ancient Turkic customs and lineage, who, in reality, wielded limited political power. On the other hand was the actual ruler, the Beg, a hereditary leader from the Bulanid family who adhered to Jewish teachings and governed the state practically, embodying the new religious and political realities. This unique arrangement, blending spiritual authority with temporal power, became a hallmark of Khazar governance, effectively balancing traditional pagan elements with Jewish influence. The story of how the Khazar ruler converted to Judaism has been preserved in a semi-legendary narrative often referred to as the Great Debate. According to this story, which appears both in Khazar, Arab, and Jewish sources, the Khazar Khagan, seeking to determine which religion was truly from God, organized a formal disputation among representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. During this event, he listened carefully to the arguments presented by each side. He then posed a provocative question to the Christian envoy, asking, "If only one faith, aside from my own, is the true one, then which is better, Islam or Judaism?" The Christian representative responded confidently that Judaism was superior because it was the original divine law, the foundational faith from which others had arisen. Later, the same question was directed to a Muslim delegate, who acknowledged the primacy of Judaism and recognized Moses, which in Islam is known as Musa, as a great prophet honored in Islamic tradition. Hearing these responses, the Khagan became even more intrigued and, ultimately, declared that if both religions acknowledged the root of their faith in Judaism, then he would choose the root itself. Although the authenticity of this legendary debate remains subject to historical scrutiny, its narrative vividly captures the mentality behind the Khazar aristocracy's political and religious choices. It reflects a strategic decision to adopt a religion that was ideologically neutral, capable of serving as a unifying identity above the fierce rivalry between the two great imperial powers of that era, the Christian Byzantine Empire and the Muslim Caliphate. The acceptance of Judaism by the ruling elite not only transformed the spiritual fabric of Khazaria but also triggered profound changes within its state structure and social hierarchy. By the 10th and 11th centuries, the Khazar Khaganate represented a unique phenomenon in the medieval world, a state where nomadic Turkic traditions intertwined with elements of Jewish theocracy and a complex, multi-ethnic trade empire. This extraordinary synthesis gave rise to a political system unlike any other, one that combined traditional steppe governance with theocratic principles and was sustained by a mosaic of diverse ethnic groups, making Khazaria a truly remarkable entity in the history of the region. At the heart of this sophisticated political system lay the final stabilization of dual power, often referred to as diarchy. At its apex stood the Khagan, a ruler whose origins traced back to the ancient Turkic tribe of Ashina. Revered as a divine figure, he was believed to embody a sacred blessing called Kut, an endowment thought to bring prosperity and well-being to the entire nation. The Khagan's persona was shrouded in a holy aura. He led a secluded life within the confines of his palace, only emerging on rare, strictly ritualized occasions that underscored the solemnity of his appearances. When he did appear, the nobles and officials would prostrate themselves, falling to their knees and averting their gaze until explicitly permitted to look upon him again. His authority was enjoyed for life, yet it was not absolute in the traditional sense. A ritual determined that his reign could not extend beyond 40 years, after which, if he survived to reach that limit, he was executed. This practice reflected the belief that his divine blessing could diminish over time, necessitating his removal to restore cosmic balance. Effectively, the Khagan functioned as a spiritual leader, a unifying symbol whose role transcended everyday governance and military command. In reality, he wielded limited practical authority. The actual political and military power resided in the hands of a chief advisor, known as the Bek, who is also referred to in various sources as the king. The Bek descended from the Bulanid family, my ancestors who had converted to Judaism and established their prominence in the political hierarchy. It was the Bek who commanded the armies, managed tax collection, held judicial authority, and directed foreign policy, making all key political decisions that shaped the state's course. This carefully balanced structure allowed the Khazars to preserve the traditional institution of the sacred Khagan, rooted in their nomadic, steppe-based civilizations, while adapting it to the realities of a settled state. While the Khagan embodied the ancient customs of the steppes, traditions that tied the community to its ancestral past, the Bek personified a new, more pragmatic ideology, influenced by Jewish traditions and a desire for organized, centralized governance. The conversion to Judaism mainly affected the ruling elite, the Bek himself, his court, the Bulanid aristocracy, and potentially a significant portion of the Khazar merchant class and nobility. To what extent this new faith penetrated the common masses remains one of the most debated topics in Khazar history. Most modern scholars agree that the majority of the population, especially the nomadic tribes, continued to adhere to their traditional beliefs, such as Tengriism and other forms of ancient paganism. Archaeological evidence, including burial customs, does not suggest any widespread or abrupt shift to Jewish funerary traditions among the general populace. Nonetheless, holding the status of the state religion provided Judaism with privileged privileges and protections. In the capital city, according to accounts by the Arab geographer al-Masudi, an elaborate legal system operated to uphold justice and social order. The city was served by a council of the highest judges, numbering either 7 or 9, depending on sources. Among these jurists, 2 were responsible for applying Jewish law, Talmudic law, to the Jewish community, while others judged Muslims according to Sharia, Christians by the commandments of the Gospel, and a single judge specialized in resolving cases among pagans based on their customary laws. Al-Masudi describes these pagan laws as a system of reason, an indication of a sophisticated, pragmatic approach to justice that sought to accommodate religious diversity and maintain social stability. This multi-layered judiciary reflects a high level of legal development and a tolerant, realistic attitude toward religious differences, an essential necessity in a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional empire. The social structure of Khazaria was highly stratified, with strict hierarchies underpinning its organization. At the very top stood the military aristocracy, the noble class composed of Khazars and possibly other noble Turkic clans. These elites, holding the title of Tarkhan, formed the ruling caste, wielding significant influence over state affairs and maintaining the military strength of the realm. Below them stood the Eltabars, the rulers of vassal nations who maintained their autonomy in exchange for paying tribute and providing military support. Their armies primarily consisted of professional warriors drawn from both the Khazars themselves and hired mercenaries. Among these forces, the most notable was the Guard of the Bek, an aristocratic military caste known as the Arsiya, composed mainly of Muslim Khazrimians. These guards earned a reputation for their exceptional bravery and unwavering loyalty, as allegiance to their service strictly forbade desertion or fleeing the battlefield under any circumstances. The majority of the population, however, consisted of nomadic pastoralists, primarily Scythian nomads, and settled farmers engaged in agriculture. Archaeological findings, especially monuments associated with the so-called Saltovo-Mayaki culture and archaeological cultures strongly linked to the Khazar Khaganate, reveal that, contrary to the common image of Khazaria as a purely nomadic empire, the region was also heavily developed in terms of agriculture, crafts, and urban settlements. Numerous towns and fortified settlements dotted the landscape, forming a vibrant and diverse civilization. The populations of these settlements were remarkably heterogeneous, featuring Oghuz Turks, Bulgars, Slavs, and various other peoples, all integrated within the Khazar Khaganate. Thus, Khazaria of the 9th and 10th centuries was a complex and multifaceted polity. It was an empire in which the Jewish ruling elite governed a Turkic nomadic population alongside a confederation of sedentary tribes practicing Islam, Christianity, and pagan beliefs. This unique political and cultural model allowed for stability and provided advantages through control of trade routes that linked different parts of Eurasia. Yet, at the same time, this complexity and internal diversity harbored potential vulnerabilities. The religious divide between the Jewish aristocracy and the largely polytheistic or different faith populations, as well as the economy's dependence on external trade networks, made the Khaganate susceptible to emerging threats and challenges already gathering strength on its borders. Meanwhile, as hostile forces amassed and posed new dangers outside its frontiers, a period of unprecedented prosperity unfolded at the heart of Khazaria, what can rightfully be called its golden age. The second half of the 9th century and the first decades of the 10th century marked the pinnacle of the Khaganate's power and influence. The authority of the Bek rulers from the Bulanid dynasty, such as Benjamin Aaron II and the most renowned of them, Joseph, was uncontested. During this era, the economy flourished, and Khazaria's international standing reached its zenith. It was within this context that a remarkable historical document, shedding light on how the Khazars viewed themselves and their history, was created. This document is known as the Khazar Correspondence. The Khazar Correspondence took place in the middle of the 10th century, roughly around the year 960, a period considered sacred in many traditions. It was a diplomatic exchange between King or Bek Joseph of the Khazars and Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a prominent Jewish scholar and diplomat serving at the court of the Caliphate of Córdoba in Spain. When Hasdai, informed by merchants from Harrison about the existence of an independent Jewish kingdom somewhere to the east, became intrigued and decided to investigate these reports, he sent a letter to Joseph. In his correspondence, he inquired about the geography, history, economy, and military organization of Khazaria, as well as the deeper question of how their people had come to embrace Judaism. Joseph's reply, written from the perspective of a Khazar ruler, is a priceless historical source. It presents the glory and grandeur of their land, describing the diverse peoples under their sway and the vastness of their realm. In his letter, Joseph recounts the legendary conversion of his ancestor Bulan to Judaism following a famed religious debate among three faiths, and he lists the names of Jewish kings who ruled before him, emphasizing their ancient and noble ancestry. This correspondence thus offers a unique window into the self-image of the Khazar state and the way its leaders wanted to be seen by outsiders, blending legendary history with political propaganda and cultural pride. The text provides a vivid overview of the political, cultural, and military landscape of the Khazar Khaganate, intertwined with personal reflections and historical context. I will now transform this narrative into a more extensive, elegant, and accessible account in English, carefully preserving the original meaning while expanding and refining the language. He describes the capital city of Tilde and shares insights into his way of life, emphasizing that with the help of the Almighty, he lives in peace and harmony. During the winter months, he and his people dwell within the city walls, securing themselves against the cold season's hardships. When the month of Nisani, which corresponds to spring, arrives, each of them ventures out individually to tend to their fields and gardens, embracing the renewal of nature and their agricultural pursuits. From Joseph's letter emerges an image of a powerful and confident ruler, a monarch who governs a flourishing land with unwavering assurance. He perceives himself as a guardian of his people, fully aware of the crucial mission he bears, to protect his territories and preserve his faith. His words reveal a ruler deeply committed to the prosperity of his state and to fulfilling his divine and political responsibilities. In addition, he addresses his role on the broader international stage, referring in particular to the ongoing conflict with Byzantium, which relentlessly persecuted the Jewish populations within its empire. He also mentions that in response to Byzantine hostility, he refuses to allow Russian ships to pass freely, especially those coming from the north to raid Arab lands along the Caspian Sea. This resistance underscores the strategic stance of his realm, standing firm to defend its interests and maintain sovereignty amid regional tensions. This golden era of the Khazar civilization found its reflection not only in political and military strength but also in material culture. Archaeological excavations of ancient city sites associated with the Sulto-Majowi culture unveil a society that was highly developed and sophisticated. These excavations reveal the construction of formidable fortresses, such as Sarkal, built from pure white limestone, demonstrating advanced architectural skills and a focus on defense. The crafts flourished during this period. Pottery, blacksmithing, and jewelry making reached high levels of craftsmanship. Notably, the Khazars developed their own currency, a coin modeled after the Arab dirham. Some of these coins bore inscriptions that replaced the traditional Islamic declaration of faith, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet," with a phrase proclaiming that Moses was God's messenger. This change vividly expressed their new religious and political identity, emphasizing their unique spiritual allegiance and independence from the Islamic world. However, despite these remarkable achievements, this prosperous period was on the verge of decline. Dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, signaling impending troubles. The system that had sustained the wealth and stability of Khazaria started to falter. Firstly, the circumstances in the steppes shifted dramatically. By the end of the 10th century, pressure from the Pecheneg, a nomadic confederation from across the Volga, forced the Hungarians, who had once been allies and tributaries of the Khazars, out of their traditional lands in the north of the Black Sea region. The Hungarians retreated, and in their place appeared a new and far more aggressive force, the Pecheneg themselves. These tribes, unruly and warlike, frequently launched devastating raids, disrupting vital trade routes and demanding constant military vigilance along Khazaria's western borders. Secondly, the control over vassal peoples diminished. In the north, near the Middle Volga, the Volga Bulgars gained strength and independence. In the year of 922, their ruler, Almas, openly embraced Islam after receiving representatives from Baghdad, thus asserting his political independence from both the Jewish Khazar realm and the wider Islamic world. This act dealt a severe blow to Khazaria's prestige and economy, as it lost control over a crucial segment of its lucrative Volga trade route. Most alarmingly, the greatest threat was forming in the northwest, in the dense forests and woodland zones. Here, a new power was emerging, the Kiev Rus, a vigorous and aggressive state led by Scandinavian and Lvivian tribes, supported by local Slavic populations. Under foreign rulers and local chieftains, this nascent state was becoming a formidable entity. Initially, relations between the Rus and the Khazars were complex and not entirely hostile. The Slavic tribes paid tribute to the Khazar Khagan, and early Kiev rulers, such as Oleg and Igor, conducted military campaigns against Byzantium, often negotiating with the Khazars, who controlled the lower Dnieper region. At times, the Rus served as mercenaries in Khazar service, reinforcing their military capacity while maintaining diplomatic ties. As Kiev's power grew and its ambitions intensified, the inevitable clash of interests materialized. The Rus aimed to gain complete control over the trade route connecting the Varangians to the Greeks, a vital artery of commerce, as well as to access the eastern markets via the Volga River, a route heavily monitored and controlled by the Khazars and the Bulgars. This pursuit of economic and strategic dominance foreshadowed an inevitable confrontation between these rising powers. This expanded and refined narrative captures the essence of the original, providing a richer, more detailed depiction of the historical and cultural context, making it suitable for clear and engaging oral storytelling or written narration. The struggle was unfolding as a fierce clash between two youthful and passionate powers vying for dominance over the vital economic arteries of Eastern Europe. In a letter penned by Tsar Joseph, the rising tension and anxiety are already palpable. He describes how he guards the mouth of the Volga River, refusing passage to the Rus who arrive on ships, preventing them from sailing through the seas toward the Muslim lands. Simultaneously, he keeps their enemies at bay, declaring that he is engaged in war with them, the Rus. These words were not merely diplomatic rhetoric, they bore a prophetic edge. Tsar Joseph warned that, if left unchallenged, these Rus would inevitably devastate the entire Muslim world up to the very gates of Baghdad. Such foresight proved accurate in time. It was precisely this youthful, furious force from the north, led by one of the most warlike princes in the history of Rus, that dealt a decisive blow to the Khazar Khaganate. The era of Khazar dominance was drawing to a close, and dusk was settling over their empire. While Khazaria reveled in the riches of its golden age, a new power was mobilizing on its northwestern borders in the surrounding forests and rivers. This was the nascent Kievan Rus, a vigorous, aggressive, and rapidly expanding state formed from an alliance between Scandinavian warriors and traders, the Varangians, or Rus, and indigenous East Slavic tribes. If Khazaria had been an empire of intermediaries, thriving by controlling established trade routes, Rus was a predator nation, a pirate state that carved its path to wealth through the sword and fire. By the middle of the 10th century, conflict between these two states had become inevitable, driven by overlapping interests and territorial ambitions. First, both powers sought dominance over the Slavic tribes, who served as a crucial buffer zone. The princes of Kiev, starting with Oleg, steadily subordinated tribes that previously paid tribute to the Khazars, such as the Polans, Severians, and Radimiks. The chronicles preserve a famous phrase attributed to Oleg, wherein he supposedly told the Severians that he was their enemy, not their friend, because he was an enemy of the Khazars, not them. This declaration was a clear assertion of Kiev's ambition for supremacy within the Slavic world, marking the beginning of a dominant political influence. Second, there was the strategic contest over lucrative trade routes. Rus controlled the headwaters of the Dnieper River and the route from the Varangians to the Greeks. However, to access the richest markets of the east, Rus needed to break Khazar control over the lower courses of the Don and Volga rivers. Early confrontations demonstrated the growing strength and audacity of the Rus raiders on their monoxylus ships. They launched devastating raids across the Caspian Sea, passing through Khazar territories at will. Sometimes the Khazars allowed their passage in exchange for a share of the spoils, at other times, they attempted to halt these invasions, leading to fierce battles. These expeditions were more than simple plunder raids. They served as reconnaissance and combat demonstrations of power and tests of the Khazar defenses, revealing their vulnerabilities. Then, in the year of our Lord 1064, a pivotal figure ascended to the Kievan throne, an embodiment of the warlike spirit that characterized early Rus. His name was Sviatoslav Igorevich. The Byzantine historian Leo the Deacon gave us a vivid, almost literary description of him, a man of medium stature with thick eyebrows and piercing blue eyes, his head shaven except for a single lock of hair in the form of an oesike, a sign of noble status, and adorned with a golden earring in his ear. Sviatoslav was austere in his everyday life, sleeping on the ground with a saddle beneath his head and nourishing himself with simple, charcoal-grilled meat. Unlike modern notions of a statesman or politician, he was no diplomat or civil administrator. Instead, he embodied the raw, relentless warrior spirit that was shaping the destiny of early Rus. He was uninterested in the internal affairs of Kiev, his focus was entirely on warfare. As a warlord and leader of his retinue, his entire life revolved around conquest and victory. Before setting out on his campaign, according to chroniclers, he would send a brief yet menacing message to his enemies, proclaiming that he was coming for them. It was at this moment that Sviatoslav realized that the future prosperity and expansion of Rus depended on a decisive, once-and-for-all resolution of the Khazar problem. He didn't simply aim to plunder the Khazar Khaganate or to wrest another tribe from its control. I speculate that his ambitions were far more expansive. His true goal was to dismantle the entire Khazar system of dominance over vital trade routes and to eliminate the Khazar state itself, which stood in the way of Rus reaching the wealth of the East. In the year 1065, though some sources suggest the campaign was carried out in 2 stages, concluding somewhere around either 1068 or 1069, embarked on his renowned military expedition. Unlike previous raids by the Rus, which typically moved along the Dnipro and Dnieper rivers, this time chose an unconventional route. He ascended the Desna River, then used a portage to drag his boats across the marshy lands to connect with the Oka River, and from there launched his attack into the Volga. This strategic maneuver allowed him to strike at the very heart of the Khazar domain from an unexpectedly northern route, catching his enemies off guard. On his way, he encountered the tributaries of the Khazars Vologda Bulgars and Burduses, who inhabited their fortified cities. These settlements were swiftly taken and thoroughly looted by S forces. When the Khazar Khan, referred to in the chronicles as a Khagan, learned of the invasion, he mustered his army and personally went out to meet the Rus. The critical battle unfolded somewhere in the Volga region, where the two forces clashed fiercely. In this confrontation, S army achieved a decisive victory, defeating the Khazar forces and capturing their capital, Itil, as succinctly recorded in the chronicle called The Tale of Bygone Years. Behind this brief mention lies a tragic and devastating episode. The Khazar army, which likely consisted heavily of heavily armed mercenaries, was shattered by S fierce onslaught. The destruction of these troops paved the way for the fall of the remaining Khazar cities that was only a matter of time. Then descended further along the Volga River and seized the heart of Khazar power. According to the Arab geographer Ibn Khordadbeh, the Rus sacked the city so thoroughly that not a single grape or bunch of raisins remained. It was a complete looting. The fall became a symbol of the collapse of Khazar strength and influence across the region. However, S campaign was not yet over. His goal was to eradicate all vital strongholds of Khazar dominance. After taking, he likely returned to his base and then moved toward the Don, where he stormed the formidable fortress of Sarkal, which the Rus renamed White Tower. From there, his forces advanced into the North Caucasus, where he defeated the Khazar allies, the Alans, known locally as, and the ancestors of the Cherkess, called. Eventually, reached the region near the Sea of Azov, subjugating the former Khazar enclave known as, which was a Khazar satrapy on the Taman Peninsula. Within a single or perhaps 2 military seasons, S forces swept through the vast territories of the Khazar Khaganate like a fiery tornado. His objective was not to conquer or hold these lands for the long term but to utterly destroy them. He shattered the backbone of the Khazar Empire, annihilating its armies, razing its capital, and capturing its strategic fortresses. The state, which was seen as parasitic, living off the transit taxes of commerce, was deprived of its vital sources of life and sustenance. For Khazaria, this marked the end. S blow was fatal. The mighty empire, which for centuries had shaped the destinies of Eastern Europe, now crumbled into ruin. The decisive and final destruction wrought by Sviatoslav marked the complete annihilation of the Khazar Khaganate as a unified and formidable state. Its principal cities, Itil, Semender, and Sarkal, were reduced to ruins, their once thriving centers obliterated by relentless assault. The Khazar army was utterly defeated, and their elite ruling class either met their demise on the battlefield or fled into the shadows to escape annihilation. The vital trade routes, which once served as the backbone of the empire's wealth and prosperity, either fell under the control of the burgeoning Russian polity or were rendered inoperative due to the chaos that erupted across the steppes. But what became of the Khazar people themselves? Why, unlike many other nations that faced the collapse of their political structures and eventually re-emerged in new forms, did the Khazar nation virtually disappear from the pages of history without leaving clear traces behind? This enduring mystery, one of the most captivating riddles left by the legacy of Khazaria, continues to beckon historians and archaeologists alike. Following Sviatoslav's military campaign, it appears that the Khazars made a desperate attempt to revive their scattered remnants and restore their sovereignty. Records from Arabic sources tell us that the displaced inhabitants of Itil, after their city's destruction, sought aid from the powerful ruler of Khwarezm, promising allegiance in exchange for assistance.
The Khazars, in turn, were offered support, but only under one strict condition: they had to convert to Islam.
Faced with encroaching threats from the nomadic tribes of the Aguz, the Khazars agreed to this demand, marking a significant and symbolic moment. Even their ruler, the Khagan, adopted Islam, embracing the new faith as a final act of political expedience aimed at ensuring survival. This was, undoubtedly, their last bold maneuver in the face of imminent extinction. For a time, a weakened and diminished Khazar political entity persisted in the lower Volga region. By the year of 985, the Grand Duchy founded by Vladimir of Kiev, who would later baptize Rus, mounted another campaign against the remnants of Khazar authority, imposing a tribute and demonstrating that some form of Khazar political structure still lingered, albeit in a considerably weakened state. The final recorded mentions of Khazar Jews occur in the Russian chronicler's annals in 986, when they are said to have arrived in Kiev along with other missionaries, seeking to introduce their faith to Grand Prince Vladimir. After this, accounts of the Khazars as a cohesive people and a unified political entity nearly vanish from historical records.
Deprived of their economic base and military strength, the Khazar state could no longer sustain itself or resist its enemies. Its lands fell under the control of a new wave of nomadic groups, initially the Pecheneg, then the Kumans or Kipchaks, who gradually absorbed the remaining population. The surviving Khazar communities, if any remained, were likely either annihilated through violence or assimilated into the dominant groups that replaced them. However, some small groups of Khazar descendants are believed to have persisted for a time in the fringe regions of the former empire. Notably, in Crimea and on the Taman Peninsula, Khazar communities probably survived the longest. Evidence from the year 2016 indicates that the Byzantines, allied with the Russian Prince Mstislav, suppressed a rebellion in Crimea led by Nikif Georgi Tsulo, who is referred to in sources as a Khazar strategos, an important military commander. Khazars are also mentioned as participants in the internal conflict at Lisivna in the year 1024, fighting alongside Mstislav of Tmutarakan.
Further, in 1079, Khazar groups are recorded as having conspired with Tmutarakan princes against Oleg Svyatopolk, capturing him and delivering him to the Byzantines. Oleg's return in 1083 and his brutal suppression of these conspirators marked one of the last confirmed instances of Khazars acting as a significant political force. So, what happened to the descendants of this once mighty empire's inhabitants? Multiple hypotheses exist, yet none provide a fully satisfying answer. The most widely accepted scenario is that the Khazar people gradually merged with other populations through processes of assimilation, losing their distinct identity over generations. This assimilation theory remains the most probable and commonly endorsed explanation among scholars. Most of the Khazars, being a Turkic-speaking people, gradually dissolved into the diverse mosaic of other nomadic groups inhabiting the steppes. They assimilated into neighboring peoples such as the Pecheneg, the Aguls, and especially the Kumans, who in the 10th and 11th centuries flooded the vast plains of Eastern Europe. Over time, these Khazar remnants integrated into the developing ethnishapes of the Golden Horde, among which emerged the modern groups like the Tatars, Kumyks, and Nogais. Some researchers propose that the ancestors of the Kumyks, who today inhabit Dagestan, may have roots tracing back to the Khazars, given their historical territory within Khazar lands and certain linguistic similarities that hint at a shared heritage. Another prevailing theory suggests a migration-driven process involving the movement and absorption of Khazar Jewish communities into the broader Jewish diaspora of Eastern Europe. The segment of the Khazar population that practiced Judaism, mainly the aristocracy and urban dwellers, could have, following the collapse of the Khazar Khaganate, migrated and integrated into existing Jewish communities across the region. This hypothesis forms the basis of what is called the Khazar theory of Ashkenazi origins, a concept popularized by Arthur Koestler. According to this theory, the majority of Ashkenazi Jews are not descendants of Jews from the land of Israel but rather of Khazar converts to Judaism. However, the scientific consensus today largely dismisses this proposition. Most genetic studies unequivocally demonstrate that Ashkenazi Jewish communities possess a clear Middle Eastern genetic signature, with little to no substantial Khazar component. Despite this, it remains plausible that some individual groups of Khazar Jews may have merged into Crimean Jewish communities, including the Krimchaks and Karaites, imparting certain cultural and linguistic influences. Among alternative hypotheses are suggestions that the Khazar legacy might have contributed to the ethnogenesis of other groups, such as the Cossacks and the Chuvashes, since the words Cossack and Khazar sound similar, and considering that Chuvash language belongs to the same Bulgar-Turkic language family as Khazar and even Hungarian. Nonetheless, all these theories are mostly speculative and lack conclusive evidence. What is undisputed is that the Khazars did not simply vanish overnight. Their disappearance was a gradual process marked by fragmentation, cultural assimilation, and migrations rather than sudden extinction. Like many other steppe states, following the disintegration of the socio-economic and political fabric that once united diverse tribes, the Khazar ethnos lost its distinct identity. Over centuries, it dissolved into the current multitude of peoples in the region, leaving behind only faint echoes of its former grandeur and an enduring mystery surrounding its origins and ultimate fate. More than 1,000 years have passed since the Khazar Khaganate vanished from the political map, yet its spectral presence continues to stir debates among historians, archaeologists, writers, and ideologists. Unlike many lost empires, the legacy of Khazaria is not primarily material. There are no majestic ruins or well-preserved monuments to testify to its former glory. Instead, its true heritage resides in the profound impact it made on the history of Eastern European peoples and in the endless controversies surrounding its past. So, what is the primary historical significance of the Khazar Khaganate? Firstly, it played a crucial role as a buffer zone for Europe. For over a century, Khazaria stood as a formidable barrier against the advances of the Arab Caliphate, preventing it from crossing the Caucasus into the European heartlands. This strategic position allowed Khazaria to serve as a kind of northern bulwark, thwarting the spread of the Islamic Empire into Eastern Europe and shaping the political and cultural landscape of the continent in profound ways. The consequences of this historical development were profound and far-reaching. Under the protective umbrella of the Khazar realm and the forested regions of Eastern Europe, there was an environment conducive to the formation and consolidation of early East Slavic tribal alliances. These alliances eventually laid the groundwork for what would become the ancient Russian state. Had the history of Khazaria taken a different course, it is conceivable that the emergence of Kievan Rus might have been replaced by a much different scenario. Perhaps one of the northern provinces of the Islamic Caliphate could have risen to prominence instead. Beyond this, Khazaria exemplified a remarkably unique model of a trading empire that defied conventional expectations of a nomadic or semi-nomadic polity. It demonstrated convincingly how a state with a nomadic or semi-nomadic ethos could maintain control over transcontinental trade routes, thereby reaping immense economic and political benefits. The stability provided by the Khazar world was instrumental in ensuring the smooth functioning of both the Volga River trade corridor and the northern branch of the Silk Road, which in turn fostered a vibrant exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures among diverse civilizations. This complex network of commerce fostered economic growth and cultural interactions that would leave lasting impacts on the region's development. Furthermore, the Khazar experience in religious tolerance and multicultural coexistence was truly exceptional for its time. In their empire, where the ruling elite adhered primarily to Judaism, different religious communities, Muslims, Christians, and pagan peoples lived side by side in relative peace and mutual respect. Each community was granted its own rights and judicial authorities, which reflected a pragmatic approach to governance that prioritized stability and cooperation over religious uniformity. This pragmatic inclusivity proved to be a crucial factor behind the empire's economic prosperity, attracting merchants, artisans, and traders from various parts of the world, all seeking new opportunities within this relatively tolerant and open society. In addition, the story of Khazaria's adoption of Judaism stands as a phenomenon of global significance. It was a bold, strategic move, a daring geopolitical balancing act aimed at carving out a distinct identity, positioned somewhere between the Islamic and Christian worlds. By embracing Judaism, Khazaria sought not only to preserve its independence but also to establish a unique cultural and political space that would set it apart from neighboring powers. This decision forever ingrained Khazaria into Jewish history, spawning legends of a lost kingdom and fueling both pride and numerous speculative theories. However, this very legacy has also become a source of fierce controversy and ideological contention. The history of Khazaria has become heavily politicized, especially in the modern era. During the 20th and 21st centuries, it turned into a battleground for various nationalist and political narratives. Some Russian historians have viewed Khazaria as a parasitic state that oppressed the Slavic population, interpreting Svyatoslav's military campaigns as acts of national liberation aimed at ending Khazar dominance. This perspective resonates with certain contemporary nationalist movements, which see the Khazar narrative as a politically convenient tool in their historical discourse.
For Jewish thought and identity, Khazaria has come to symbolize both a lost nation and a testament to Jewish resilience and military valor.
It became, for many, proof that the Jewish people could be not only a literary and scholarly nation but also a martial nation capable of defending itself and asserting its sovereignty. One of the most controversial aspects of Khazar history is related to theories suggesting a Turkic Khazar origin for Ashkenazi Jews, initially emerged within academic circles. This hypothesis gained popularity when it was further promoted by Arthur Koestler in his book The 13th Tribe. The theory posits that modern Ashkenazi Jews do not descend primarily from the ancient Israelites but rather from the Khazars, Turkic peoples who converted to Judaism en masse. This idea has been exploited in anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic propaganda, which argues that contemporary European Jews lack a genuine historical claim to the land of Israel because they are genetically and ancestrally not Semitic but rather descendants of the Khazar Turkic tribes. Despite the fact that robust scientific evidence from genetics, linguistics, and anthropology overwhelmingly counters this theory and discredits its claims, it persists within conspiracy-driven circles. The theory's survival is largely due to its alignment with ideological and political agendas rather than factual accuracy. Similarly, archaeological research into Khazar civilization is shrouded in mystery, adding layers to the enigma surrounding this history. Chief among enduring puzzles is the elusive whereabouts of the ancient city of Itil, the capital of Khazaria, whose exact location remains unknown despite extensive scholarly and archaeological efforts. In summary, the history of Khazaria continues to be a subject of fascination and debate. Its legacy as a unique multicultural empire that mastered trade and diplomacy, as well as the complex interpretive fabric woven around its story, ensures that Khazaria remains an evocative and contentious chapter of medieval history. The exact location of the capital of the powerful empire remains unknown to this day. For many centuries, the prevailing theory suggested that the city had been submerged as a result of the Caspian Sea's rising levels. However, recent archaeological excavations at the Zaimsdelskoye settlement in the Deltaev region of the Volga near Astrakhan offer a glimmer of hope that the legendary capital's remnants might someday be uncovered. The artifacts discovered there indicate the presence of a substantial urban center, which undeniably existed during the Khazar period. Thus, the Khazar Khaganate, though physically vanished, continues to live on as a compelling historical myth, a symbol of a bygone era, and a vibrant subject for intense scholarly and ideological debates. This story transcends mere chronicles of rise and fall; it reflects the way history can be reinterpreted and harnessed in the present day. The narrative about the Khazar Empire is not only about the grandeur and decline of a steppe-land civilization but also about how the past can be vividly reconstructed, manipulated, and invoked to shape contemporary identity and political discourse. This ongoing fascination serves as a perpetual reminder of the complexity and ambiguity inherent in historical processes. Entire worlds, civilizations, and cultures can emerge, flourish, and then gradually disappear, leaving behind only faint echoes amidst the steppe's silence. These remnants prompt us to confront unsettling questions that perhaps will never find definitive answers, particularly, why did such a formidable empire suddenly collapse? It is undeniable that Svyatoslav's formidable strike dealt a lethal blow to the Khazars, yet this blow came at the end of a long process of weakening. The fall of the Khazar Khaganate was the consequence of a combination of external pressures and internal crises, reaching a tragic peak by the middle of the 10th century. The story of Khazaria's collapse exemplifies how civilizations are subject to relentless change, how structures that once contributed to their success can, over time, become their undoing. Internal factors significantly contributed to this downfall. First and foremost was the religious and social divide that had grown within the empire. The ruling elite's adoption of Judaism created a profound ideological chasm between the leadership and the majority of the population, which remained pagan, Christian, or Muslim. This division undermined the internal cohesion of the state, weakening its unity from within. The power of the Khazar ruler was maintained not merely through widespread popular support but relied heavily on a well-trained mercenary army and revenues from trade. When these pillars began to falter, the empire's foundation was left fragile and unstable.
Secondly, the empire's economic vulnerability played a critical role in its decline.
The Khazar economy was heavily dependent on transcontinental trade routes, which made it highly susceptible to shifts in the broader global economic climate. Soviet historian Lev Gumilev linked the crisis of Khazaria to events in distant China, where the revolt of Huang Chao towards the end of the 9th century destabilized the Great Silk Road. This upheaval significantly reduced the flow of trade goods, leading to a decline in customs revenues. Without sufficient funding, the Khazar rulers could no longer sustain their costly mercenary armies, leading to a dramatic decrease in military strength and territorial control. Thirdly, there was a loss of passionarity, a term Gumilev used to describe the collective vigor and vitality of peoples. The Khazar ethnic group had passed through its developmental peak long before, entering a phase of decline. The aristocracy and merchant classes, once vigorous and expansionist, grew complacent, wealthy from trade, but increasingly disconnected from the martial spirit that had once allowed the empire to expand and defend its boundaries. They transformed into rentiers, elite groups living off their advantageous positions, no longer capable of active expansion or resistance against rising, younger, more passionate peoples such as the Rus. External factors further accelerated Khazaria's decline. Most notably, the emergence of new enemies altered the geopolitical landscape of the steppes forever. Changes in the ethnic composition of the region became a decisive and tragic turning point for the Khazars. The arrival of new tribes and peoples, often more aggressive and dynamic, reshaped the region's power balances. The territory that had once been the heartland of the Khazar Empire gradually fell into the influence of these rising powers, sealing its collapse. In summary, the fall of the Khazar Khaganate was not caused by a single event but by a confluence of internal cracks and external upheavals. Internal divisions, economic fragility, and a waning collective vitality eroded the empire from within, while external pressures, particularly the shifting ethnic and political map of the steppes, delivered the final blow. The story of Khazaria remains an enduring narrative about the inevitable flux of civilizations, illustrating how the structures that once secured success can, over time, become the very reasons for their downfall. It is a poignant reminder of the transient nature of greatness, leaving behind only echoes of an era long gone, echoing across the silent steppes and raising questions that history may never fully answer. Why did this mighty empire, so rich and powerful, suddenly crumble? Although the direct blow from Sviatoslav was undoubtedly decisive, it came upon a state already weakened by numerous internal vulnerabilities. The collapse of Khazaria was the result of complex, intertwined factors, both internal and external, that reached their critical point by the middle of the 10th century, sealing its fate forever. The departure of loyal Hungarians and the arrival of hostile Pecheneg in the late 19th century created a constant threat along the western borders of the Khaganate, severing vital trade routes and draining military resources that were crucial for its stability. This period also saw a significant rise in internal separatism, as the state, initially a tributary governed under the shadow of the Khazar world, began to push for independence. The fall of Volga Bulgaria represented a particularly devastating blow, depriving Khazaria of control over the northern stretch of the Volga trade route and greatly weakening its economic and strategic position. Meanwhile, the growing Alania on the Caucasus Mountains pursued increasingly independent and often hostile policies, frequently aligning with Byzantine interests, which further exacerbated Khazaria's vulnerabilities. A third, equally significant factor was the rise of Kiev Russia, which emerged as a formidable external force. Russia was no mere recurring adversary, it represented a systematic competitor, aspiring to dominate the same geopolitical and economic niche, namely, control over the crucial trade routes of Eastern Europe. Unlike the Arabs, who were primarily interested in raiding and spreading their faith through conquest, or the Pecheneg, who conducted chaotic raids, Rus targeted Khazaria in a deliberate effort to eliminate a major rival. Sviatoslav's military campaign was not merely a raid but a strategic operation aimed at destroying the Khazar threat once and for all. By the year 965, the Khazar Khaganate was already teetering on the edge, like a colossus built on weak foundations. Its military might had waned, its economy was devastated by crisis, and internal cohesion was severely compromised. The empire was surrounded on all sides by enemies, disloyal vassals, and increasingly distant allies, leaving it vulnerable to crushing blows. That destructive strike by Sviatoslav arrived precisely at the most fragile moment, and its repercussions proved to be devastatingly effective. The Khazar Empire could not withstand the relentless pressure and, ultimately, disintegrated under the weight of mounting external and internal challenges. The decline of the Khazar Khaganate offers us several critical lessons about statehood and resilience. It vividly illustrates that no empire is eternal,
and that even the strongest powers can gradually transform into their greatest vulnerabilities over time.
This highlights the importance of adaptation. Khazaria perished because it failed to adjust to the rapidly changing world around it. Its political model as a mediating state, effective during the 7th and 8th centuries, proved increasingly unviable in the 10th century, as new, more aggressive powers emerged, powers that sought not to mediate, but to command directly. The story also imparts a valuable lesson on the necessity of unity, for internal divisions, fueled by religious and cultural differences, began as mere fissures but eventually evolved into a ticking time bomb that exploded during times of crisis. The deep rift between the elite and the common people became a liability that further destabilized the state. Additionally, the fall of Khazaria teaches us about the peril of overdependency. Its economy was heavily reliant on transcontinental trade, a single source of wealth vulnerable to external shocks. This monoculture made the Khaganate economically fragile, unable to withstand sudden disruptions. As the mist begins to lift over the broad expanses of the Volga River, somewhere beneath the water's surface and the thick river sill lie the ruins of Itil, the once thriving capital of this vanished empire. Today, the Khazar Khaganate has faded into history as a shadow, a ghostly entity that has become an almost mythic state, present now only in fragmented chronicles, in proud lines of royal correspondence, and in silent fragments of ceramics from the Saltovo-Methian culture. Its story resembles a legend, rather than pure historical fact, a myth woven around a steppe empire that for 2 centuries stood as the third great power of the world alongside Byzantium and the Islamic Caliphate. It is the myth of a warrior people turned traders, a narrative of transformation that captured the imagination across ages. This was an empire rooted in the steppes, which for a time transcended its origins to become a significant force in global history, embodying the complexity, resilience, and ambiguities of a vanished civilization, whose echoes continue to resonate through the ages. The myths surrounding the pagans, those ancient peoples whose elites, in their quest to find a true place in the world, chose the venerable faith of the descendants of Abraham, continues to captivate our imagination. This story holds an extraordinary power to challenge our assumptions because it defies conventional narratives. It demonstrates vividly how history does not follow a straight, predictable course but instead twists and turns in ways that can surprise even the most seasoned scholars. The tale of these ancient tribes reminds us of how fragile the greatest powers can be, how swiftly the wheels of fortune can turn, elevating entire nations to dizzying heights only to bring them crashing down in moments of misfortune. For instance, the Khazars managed to halt the Arab army's relentless advance into Eastern Europe, effectively blocking their expansion for a time. Yet, ultimately, they succumbed under the might of the Russian tribes, who swept across their lands. The Khazars established a vibrant hub of religious tolerance and cultural exchange, a rare oasis of stability amid a turbulent epoch.
Nevertheless, this seemingly resilient civilization was ultimately overwhelmed by younger, more monolithic, and fanatical peoples, whose sweeping armies and fervent faiths transformed the landscape.
The Khazars made a remarkable and unique civilization choice, a deliberate effort to forge a different path than their neighbors. Ironically, this decision might have contributed to their eventual decline, distancing them from their subjects and accelerating their downfall. Today, when we examine the map of Eastern Europe, we see that the territory once known as Khazaria now hosts a mosaic of different countries and peoples. However, a closer look reveals its invisible influence still lingering beneath the surface, the fact that this region did not become part of the Islamic civilization, and that here, under the shadow of the Khazar world, the roots of Kievan Rus took firm hold. Amid ongoing debates about history and the quest for national identities of the peoples inhabiting these lands, the shadow of the Khazar Khaganate continues to cast itself over the Volga steppes. Archaeologists tirelessly seek its lost capital, while historians persist in deciphering its many secrets, those of an empire that dared to follow a third path, risking everything with its unorthodox approach. Some believe that the Khazars simply fulfilled their historical mission and quietly vanished from the scene, leaving behind a legacy that would have been impossible to replicate, a world profoundly different from what might have been if they had survived. This enduring, mysterious heritage lies at the core of their story. It reveals a civilization that made a bold, unconventional choice and paid a heavy price, yet, in doing so, left a trail that still influences the cultural fabric of our region today. We thank you sincerely for spending this time with us, exploring the depths of history together. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to reflect on it, to engage with us by sharing your thoughts, and to keep the spirit of discovery alive. Soon, we will embark on yet another journey through time, uncovering more enigmatic and remarkable pages from the past, stories that shape our understanding of the world and ourselves.